In 1776, the United States of America declared its independence from Britain. The colonies said, "We will be free," but Britain did not agree. For 7 long years, war was fought. The American people were poor, and the Continental Army was poorly equipped, while Britain had one of the strongest armies and navies in the world. Still, under the leadership of George Washington, the Americans did not give up. In 1781, at Yorktown, the British Army surrendered, and by 1783, with the Treaty of Paris, the United States was finally recognized as a free nation. But freedom was not complete, because while the new nation was free from Britain, millions of people within America were still not free. Slavery had existed long before independence, and even after 1783, it continued to grow. In the North, some states began to end slavery, but in the South, it spread deeper, fueled by cotton plantations and cruel laws. The country was divided, half free, half slave, and every year the tension grew stronger. It was in this young and troubled America that a boy was born. On February 12, 1809, in a small log cabin in Kentucky, a child entered the world with no wealth, no privilege, no power. His name was Abraham Lincoln. One day, he would rise to lead this divided nation, end slavery, and give true meaning to the word freedom. Government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. This is the story of Abraham Lincoln, the leader who saved the Union and ended slavery. Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, in a tiny one-room log cabin on the frontier of Hardin County, Kentucky. His father, Thomas Lincoln, worked as a struggling farmer and carpenter. His mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, was gentle and kind, teaching young Abraham the values of honesty, compassion, and hard work. The family owned very little. Their cabin had no proper floor, no glass windows, and no comforts. Life was a daily fight for survival. Food came from hunting and farming, and clothes were made at home from rough cloth. When Abraham was just 9 years old, tragedy struck. His mother fell sick and died of milk sickness, a disease caused by drinking contaminated milk. The loss left a deep scar on the boy's heart. After his mother's death, young Abraham's life was filled with struggle. Yet even through this pain, he carried one treasure, his love for learning. There were almost no regular schools nearby. Sometimes a teacher, known as a wandering schoolmaster, would come to the area. Classes were held in a log cabin or even in a barn, and lasted only a few weeks or months before the teacher moved on. All those short lessons together gave him less than 1 year of schooling in his entire life. And because his family was poor, Abraham spent most of his days working in the fields, cutting wood, and plowing soil. Still, Lincoln refused to let that stop him. He borrowed books from neighbors. At night, he sat by the glow of a fire, reading the Bible, Aesop's fables, history, and law. He wrote and practiced on wooden boards when he had no paper. Slowly, word by word, he taught himself. Though born in poverty, with almost no education, Abraham Lincoln's hunger for knowledge would one day grow into the wisdom of a leader. After this painful time, a light entered Abraham's life. His father remarried, and his new stepmother, Sarah Bush Johnston, brought warmth and kindness into the family. She treated Abraham as her own son and encouraged his love for reading. While others only saw a poor farm boy, she saw a boy with great potential. She often said, Abraham was different. He wanted to learn. With her support, Lincoln's passion for books grew stronger, but survival still demanded hard work. The family moved from Kentucky to Indiana and later to Illinois, always searching for better land. Wherever they went, Abraham worked tirelessly, splitting logs, plowing fields, and doing farm labor to help his family survive. This backbreaking work earned him the nickname, the Rail Splitter, because he often cut large logs into wooden rails for fences. At just 19 years old, Lincoln made his first long journey as a flatboatman down the Mississippi River. He had been hired to transport farm goods, corn, pork, and other produce, from Illinois to the busy trade city of New Orleans, where they would be sold for better prices. This journey was not just work. It was Lincoln's first chance to see the wider world beyond the frontier. But in New Orleans, he also witnessed something that shook him deeply. Enslaved men, women, and children being sold in markets like property. The sight of families torn apart stayed with him forever, planting a deep hatred of slavery in his heart. Later, Lincoln worked as a store clerk in the small village of New Salem, Illinois. Here, his honesty became legendary. If he accidentally overcharged a customer by just a few cents, he would walk miles to return the money. If he gave the wrong weight for goods, he would correct it immediately. This deep integrity earned him the name Honest Abe. Life in New Salem also gave Lincoln the chance to grow as a speaker. In village gatherings, he told humorous stories that made people laugh. But when serious matters arose, his words carried wisdom, courage, and fairness. It was here that Lincoln began shaping the simple, powerful speaking style that would one day move an entire nation. At the same time, his hunger for learning never faded. With almost no formal schooling, he turned every spare moment into study. He read books on grammar, mathematics, history, and law. Neighbors often saw the tall young man stretched out under a tree, reading for hours after finishing his chores. Poverty had denied him classrooms and teachers, but through honesty, hard work, and self-education, Abraham Lincoln was forging the character that would one day make him the leader of a nation. By his early 20s, Abraham Lincoln had already lived many lives: farm worker, rail splitter, flatboatman, and store clerk. But inside, he carried bigger dreams. He wanted to understand the world and to serve people beyond his village. In 1832, at just 23 years old, Lincoln announced his candidacy for the Illinois state legislature. He had no money, no formal education, and no powerful connections. All he had was his honesty, his hard work, and his growing skill with words. The election was tough, and Lincoln lost. For most men, defeat would have been the end, but for Lincoln, it was the beginning. Instead of giving up, he made a decision. If he was going to serve the people, he needed to prepare himself. So he trained his mind and his voice. Lincoln began to study grammar, mathematics, and history more seriously. He read law books by himself, page by page, line by line, often borrowing them from friends and walking miles just to return them. At night, he practiced speeches by firelight, testing the rhythm of his words. During the day, he joined community debates, learning how to speak with confidence before an audience. Slowly, the awkward farm boy became a bold speaker. His plain but powerful style reached the hearts of ordinary people. His ability to tell stories, use humor, and speak with honesty made him stand out. By 1834, Lincoln tried again, and this time, the people elected him to the Illinois House of Representatives. He would serve 4 terms, from 1834 to 1842. As a legislator, Lincoln worked for the people. He supported building roads, bridges, and canals so farmers could move crops and goods more easily. He spoke in favor of education, believing schools should be open to all children, not only the rich. And though it was risky in those years, he spoke against slavery, calling it unjust and dangerous for the nation's future. Above all, he was respected for his honesty and fairness. Even opponents admitted that Lincoln argued with reason, not anger. At the same time, he officially began his law career. Lincoln had never gone to college, but in those days, that was not required. Instead, he read law, studying legal books on his own and under the guidance of local lawyers. He taught himself by rewriting complicated legal passages into simple words, until he truly understood them. After years of self-study, he took the Illinois bar exam in 1836 and passed. Abraham Lincoln was now a licensed lawyer. Soon, he gained respect in court for his clear arguments, fairness, and integrity. He wasn't just fighting cases to win, he was fighting for justice. Still, his hunger for public service did not fade. In 1838, he tried to become Speaker of the Illinois House, but lost. In 1843, he sought a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, but lost again. In 1846, he tried once more, and this time he won. Lincoln served one term in Congress from 1847 to 1849, where he spoke out against the Mexican-American War and took a firm stance against the spread of slavery. But when he sought re-election in 1848, he was defeated. These years of failure, study, and persistence transformed Lincoln. He was no longer just a rail splitter or a store clerk. He was becoming a man of law, a man of words, and a man of the people, a leader in the making. By the 1850s, Abraham Lincoln was a well-respected lawyer in Illinois, but America itself was breaking apart. The country was divided between North and South, between states that opposed slavery and states that defended it. Every new territory that wanted to join the Union raised the same burning question: would it be free or slave? In 1854, Congress passed the Kansas-Nebraska Act. It allowed the people of new territories to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery. To Lincoln, this was dangerous. It opened the door for slavery to spread across the nation. The act pulled Lincoln back into politics with new fire. He gave powerful speeches warning that slavery was not only unjust, but a threat to America's survival. In one of his most famous lines, he declared, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." He warned that the United States could not last forever, half free and half slave. Many agreed with him. Others were furious. But no one could ignore him anymore. In 1858, Lincoln ran for the U.S. Senate from Illinois, one of the two lawmaking bodies of Congress, where each state is represented by two senators. Winning a Senate seat meant national influence and power. His opponent was the famous Democrat Stephen A. Douglas. What happened next became one of the most famous events in American politics, the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Crowds gathered by the thousands. Farmers, townspeople, and travelers filled fields and town squares just to hear them speak. The debates were long, sometimes lasting 3 hours. Douglas was confident and polished, a skilled politician, but Lincoln, tall, plain-looking, with a voice full of conviction, spoke to people's hearts. He argued that slavery was morally wrong. He said that no man had the right to own another. He did not speak with fancy words, but with clarity, honesty, and a deep belief in justice. When the votes were counted, the people of Illinois had supported Lincoln strongly. But in those days, senators were not chosen directly by the people. They were chosen by the state legislature, and because the Illinois legislature had more Democrats than Republicans, they gave the seat to Stephen Douglas. So Lincoln was defeated, but the debates made him a national figure. Newspapers across the country published his speeches. People who had never heard his name before now spoke of him as a man of wisdom and courage. Defeat had once again carried him forward, from the log cabin to the courtroom, and now to the national stage. Abraham Lincoln's rise could no longer be stopped. By 1860, Abraham Lincoln was no longer just a local lawyer from Illinois. The Lincoln-Douglas debates had made him a national figure, admired for his honesty, clarity, and courage. But the crisis was deepening, and the nation stood on the edge of division. The issue of slavery divided the nation more bitterly than ever before. Southern leaders demanded the right to expand slavery into new territories. Northern leaders resisted, insisting it must not spread further. Violence had even erupted in Kansas and Missouri, where pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers clashed in the streets. In this storm, the Republican Party needed a leader who could speak with both strength and integrity. In 1860, they chose Abraham Lincoln as their candidate for president. Lincoln's message was simple but powerful. He would not abolish slavery where it already existed, but he would stop it from spreading into new states and territories. This promise gave hope to the North and fear to the South. The campaign was fierce. Southern newspapers painted him as a danger to their way of life. But in the North and West, ordinary people saw him as one of their own. He was Honest Abe, the poor boy who had risen through hard work, and they believed he understood their struggles. On November 6, 1860, the results were announced. Abraham Lincoln was elected the 16th President of the United States. But his victory carried a heavy cost. Lincoln won with strong support from the North and West, yet not a single Southern state voted for him. To the South, his election meant their voice no longer mattered. One by one, Southern states declared they would secede, leaving the Union and forming their own country. By the time Lincoln took the oath of office in March 1861, 7 states had already broken away to create the Confederate States of America. More would soon follow. In his inaugural address, Lincoln pleaded for unity. "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies." But his words could not stop the storm. On April 12, 1861, Confederate cannons opened fire on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. The fort was still held by U.S. soldiers, even though South Carolina had left the Union. The Confederates demanded that the soldiers leave, but Lincoln refused to surrender the fort. When he tried to send supplies, Southern forces saw it as a challenge, so they attacked, firing for more than a day until the fort fell. The Civil War had begun. The poor boy from a log cabin was now president. He had hoped to heal and unite, but history called him to guide a nation through its darkest trial. The Civil War was unlike anything America had ever seen. Brother fought against brother, neighbor against neighbor. The nation was torn in two, the Union in the North and the Confederacy in the South. At the center of it all stood Abraham Lincoln, a president with almost no military experience. Yet now, he was the commander-in-chief of a war that would decide the very survival of the United States. In the beginning, the Union Army suffered defeat after defeat. Lincoln faced generals who were slow, cautious, or unwilling to fight. He grew frustrated, often saying, "If General McClellan does not want to use the army, I would like to borrow it for a while." The war dragged on, costing thousands of lives. Casualties mounted at places like Bull Run, Shiloh, and Antietam. Critics called Lincoln weak and unfit. Even members of his own cabinet doubted him. But Lincoln refused to give up. He spent long nights in the War Department, reading telegraphs from the battlefield, studying maps, and pushing his generals to act. More than strategy, he carried the weight of sorrow. He visited hospitals to comfort wounded soldiers. He wrote letters to grieving families. And in the quiet of the White House, he mourned the deaths of thousands, as if each one were his own child. As the war continued, Lincoln realized it was not only a fight to save the Union, it was a fight to end slavery. On January 1, 1863, he signed the Emancipation Proclamation. With one stroke of the pen, he declared that all enslaved people in the Confederate States were free. The proclamation did not end slavery everywhere, but it changed the very purpose of the war. Now the Union fought not only to preserve the nation, but to bring freedom to millions who had been denied it for generations. The road ahead was still long and bloody. The battles of Gettysburg, Vicksburg, and many more lay before him. But Abraham Lincoln had given the war a new meaning, a struggle for liberty and human dignity. The poor boy from the log cabin was now the leader of a nation in its darkest hour, guiding it with courage, compassion, and an unshakable belief in justice. By mid-1863, the Civil War had already claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. The nation was bleeding, and the outcome was still uncertain. But in the summer of that year, two great victories gave the Union new hope. In the West, Union forces under General Ulysses S. Grant captured Vicksburg, Mississippi. This gave the Union control of the Mississippi River, splitting the Confederacy in two. At the same time, in the East, Union and Confederate armies clashed in a small town in Pennsylvania, Gettysburg. For 3 days, from July 1st to July 3rd, 1863, the fields ran red with blood. More than 50,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing. It was the largest battle ever fought in North America. When the smoke cleared, the Union had won. The Confederate Army retreated, never again able to launch a major invasion of the North. Gettysburg was the turning point of the war. Months later, on November 19, 1863, Abraham Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg to dedicate a cemetery for the fallen soldiers. The main speaker that day talked for 2 hours. Lincoln then rose to speak. He spoke for only 2 minutes, but his words became immortal. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. The Gettysburg Address was more than a speech. It was a promise. Lincoln reminded America that the war was not only about saving the Union, it was about giving the nation a new birth of freedom. He transformed the sacrifice of the fallen into a vision for the future, a country where liberty and equality would survive forever. From that moment, the Union cause was reborn. The war was still far from over, but Lincoln's words lit a fire of hope that carried soldiers and citizens through the darkest days ahead. By 1864, the Civil War had dragged on for more than 3 years. The Union had won key victories, but the bloodshed seemed endless. Families grieved, towns were shattered, and hope was fading. As the presidential election approached, many doubted Lincoln could win again. War-weary Americans were losing patience. Some wanted peace, even if it meant letting the South keep slavery. But in the summer of 1864, everything changed. Union General William Tecumseh Sherman captured Atlanta, Georgia, striking at the heart of the Confederacy. This victory gave the North renewed confidence, and with it, Lincoln's re-election. On November 8, 1864, Abraham Lincoln was elected to a second term as president. It was a powerful message. The people still trusted him to finish the fight. In his second inauguration, Lincoln spoke not with triumph, but with humility. He urged Americans to heal, to forgive, and to rebuild the nation with compassion rather than hatred. Just weeks later, the war finally drew to an end. On April 9, 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee, commander of the South's strongest army, surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant, commander of the Union armies, at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. After 4 long years and more than 600,000 dead, the Union was saved. Slavery was abolished forever by the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. The nation celebrated. Church bells rang, crowds cheered, and for the first